Hello, everybody. Yeah, this is the fifth week of our 2.1. I am imagining we're going to get some late joiners probably because my class last night, same subject, different group, of course, different section. Some of them have asked to join tonight. Either they couldn't attend on Tuesday or we had a glitch in the middle of the class that some people might have then missed some of the material. So I will be stopping occasionally to let more people in. Okay, so let's do the gallery view so I can view as we actually live. All right, I wanted to start with a little bit of somebody's making ice drinks. They're too close to their microphone. Okay, I gotta admit these other two people. Hang on, it'll just take a moment. All right. Okay, so I was about to say the papers are due 2 weeks from tonight. And because of that fact, that means there's only one more class before the deadline. I want to give you all a chance, in case any of you still have any questions, to ask those questions tonight, either right now before we start the lecture, or when the class is over. Well, I'll probably even ask at the start of the second half after the break. And we're going to end early tonight, as much as 20 minutes early. I'm sure no one will object because there aren't as many slides on the syllabus. As you noticed, if you've looked at it, there's 6 must-know slides. We'll get to those in a few minutes. But first, I want to remind, there's still people, I get emails from people already after, 4 weeks, somehow they're still not certain of the parameters of the choices that you're able or allowed to make about what kind of topics, what work types of works of art you are allowed to write about in your papers. Anything that is a visual work of art. Obviously, that means painting, sculpture, drawing, photography, or architecture. And it doesn't have to be from this period. The syllabus from any of the periods we're covering. It doesn't have to be from any of the cultures that are being discussed in this class. It could be any work of art from any period by any artist except your own. That's the only limitation, because of course it's a research paper and one assumes if it's your own art you wouldn't need to research it. So that's the only limitation. Okay, so that's one clarification. Another is to remind you that you have the option of sending me a sample, part or all of, semi-final draft, if you want to put it that way. Please label it that way so I know it's not your final paper. If you want to do that as an attachment, a PDF, of course, to my email, as long as you give me at least 48 hours, don't do it the day before it's due. I won't be able to get back to you in time. But if you would be able to do that, by the weekend before the due date, or certainly the Monday before. For this class, it's Wednesday, the 29th, that the paper's due, of course. So that gives you an option of having me respond and tell you what you're missing, if there's anything you need to add, what you did, cover correctly or well, and then what you might still need to add. You have that option up until, let's say, 48 hours before the due date. Okay, I'm admitting one more person here. All right, but those are just 2 general points. Are there any questions anyone has specifically about the papers? And well, of course, you should all now have printed out the 5 requirements for your short papers and use that as a guideline, as well as the sample paper that I sent everybody, which, as a PDF, you should be able to print out and look at that to check and compare with the paper you're writing. Now, I'm going to send the cover sheet, which you'll need next week. So I'm going to double check, but I'm sure the goal is by the time each of my 2 sections meet next week, you will all have received, or should have all received, the cover sheets. You will need to attach that to the paper and make it one file. It worked very well when we did that in the spring, after we made that sudden drastic transition right after the 2-week shutdown or lockdown period. So it worked pretty well. As long as they're in a PDF format, I can open them and grade them or send them to the readers, and then of course keep a copy of them for my records and for your future reference, which you should do too. I think everyone knows this. In any college class, you should not throw away the file, whatever format it's in, from the assignments that you've turned in. I mean, maybe quizzes aren't that important, but papers, research papers, and exams you should always save for at least 1 year. We're required to save them that long. Teachers, at least that's what I was told when I was hired, and I do. And then eventually I recycle those old ones. But that's in case a question comes up about a grade that might, we're human. We're not perfect. No, nobody is. Once in a while, something might not get correctly entered in the grade book or the, grading system. And then it's easy to verify if you've got a copy and I've got a copy of, or if I didn't still have a copy, you've got yours as a backup. Just an extra precaution. Okay, anybody have any questions now at all about? Yes.
I do, sir.
Go ahead.
You say visual art, so could potentially like a movie or sequential art be used or no?
That's a good question, and I used to allow it, but that's actually a separate category of art, film study, right? And so I tell you what, you could use a still image or a poster, like poster art, because some of the most famous posters in the history of art were created for, very famous movies, as you all know, I'm sure. So you could do that, but you would then be analyzing it mostly as an individual image, either from the movie, if it's a photo, a still from the movie, or a painting of the actors in the movie, right, from a scene. And of course, then you would bring in the theme of the movie and the meaning of that scene, what was happening. You could do it that way, but not an analysis of the entire film. That's a whole different. I taught film studies. It was one of my favorite class at Berkeley City College. 60 students. They were out into the hallway. There wasn't enough room for them all in a small classroom in a basement of a department store with no air conditioning. No one left early. It was a fun class, but I haven't taught that in years. So I'd have to say I'd be cautioning you not to try to write a whole analysis of an entire film. However, I'm glad you brought that up. I guess it's Nora, right? Anyway, for all my students, don't forget that extra credit option. I just added that in the spring and restated it on the grading policy handout. 10 points extra credit if you want to watch any kind of film or documentary about the life of an artist. And I've already had several people ask me if they could watch Frida, about Frida Kahlo. Great movie, excellent, superbly acted and set in, filmed in the places where the action occurred, at the dialogue, the script, the accuracy. It's one of the best films about the life of an artist. Yeah. So then what happens? You see the film or documentary. If it's at least 60 minutes, it can't be a short one then. And just write 2 pages about what you learned about that artist, their life, and I'm admitting one more person there, and also their art. What in the movie did they talk about related to the art of that artist's career? So I hope that answers that question. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Don't forget, you can use a movie, before I forget, as one of your 3 new sources. If there's of course there are movies about a whole bunch of artists, a bunch of movies about Van Gogh. Now there's like 20 or 30 of them. When I first started teaching, there was only 2 or 3. So you could cite in your, a scene from, or dialogue from, or information you took, a quote, whatever, from a movie as one of your 3 new sources in your bibliography. Tay, did you have a question?
Yeah, so about the paper. So the sample paper for the sheet that tells you what's required to have like a good score. I just want to know, do you have to have in-text citations or footnotes? Because
Yes.
hers
Yes.
doesn't, and she still had a really good score. So do you have to have that?
Well, I looked at that paper, and hang on, I think I might have it right here in my notebook.
Okay.
I chose it so that it would have those. I mean, it doesn't have to have footnotes. In fact, most people don't use footnotes anymore.
Okay.
Let us see. Yes, it does. It definitely does.
Which part?
There on the first page. I hope we're talking about the same paper. It's one about Toulouse-Lautrec's Woman in a Black Boa.
Yeah.
Right there on the first page is the first one. She cited 2 sources.
Oh, okay. I just saw that. Okay.
Yes, see, and
Okay.
that's fine. That's what we're all here for. So that's one example. That's the title. Author's last name from a book that's in the bibliography, plus the page she took the quote from. Anytime you have a quote, you should do that.
Okay.
And then it's done again somewhere else. I forget where, probably toward the end. There were at least 2 citations. Yeah. And of course, if you do a website, you would do, you know, the URL.
Right.
And oh, here she did. Yeah, she did in parentheses on the first or third line, the first paragraph.
Okay.
Last name. Now she should have put the page number, so that'd be 1 point off, I guess.
Okay.
Perhaps that either I or my reader, whoever graded it, was a reader graded it, didn't catch that, but that's pretty minor.
Oh, okay.
They should have done the URL, but instead they did the name of the author of the article from a website. But then they cited the website correctly. You know, noodlebib.com, I mentioned this the first night of class, or second, is a good source, just like it sounds. The word noodlebib.com is now officially a SRJC recommended source for information. And there are tutorial, I'm sure you saw them if you've been checking your email, within the last week, maybe it was a little longer, within the last 7 to 10 days, the administration sent out information for people to join a video tutorial, whatever, instructional video about how to use that website, or even just how to cite sources. I think it's just how to cite the sources directly, so you don't have to, you know, go through 2-3 steps to find out how to cite a book or a magazine or a video. I'm pretty reasonable and flexible. Like you see, I didn't take a point off from that person not putting the URL, but they at least cited 2 new sources. So that's the main thing. Yeah, in their text. And footnotes are fine, but they're much more cumbersome, of course, or time consuming. If you do a full traditional footnote, that's great. And then that means they would be, of course, at the bottom of the page of each citation. Okay, any other questions about the papers? Yeah, I just want to give you guys a chance to ask, and I'll check in again at the end as I always do. Okay, so tonight's topic is Aegean art, and that is a particularly obscure topic for a lot of people, because is it Greek art? Are we talking about the ancient Greeks? Yes and no. We're talking about the islands off the coast of Greece, which are in the area of the Eastern Mediterranean Sea called the Aegean. Now, I don't need to spell that word because it's right there on your syllabus, which you should have right beside your laptops, right? That we're going to go over tonight's topic, Aegean, of course, Aegean Sea. But what I did do that I didn't think of last night, so anyone who was here last night at the beginning of the class might or might not have understood some of the, here we go. I think speaker view, that should be, whoops. Yeah, I want to show you, similar to what I did with the some of the terms from ancient Egypt last week. You don't have to take a screenshot of this if you don't want, but because these are not words that are on the syllabus. That's why I wrote them out. Tonight, we're going to cover these cultures. The Minoans, I'm going to explain who they were in just a couple minutes before we start the lecture. As I always do, I like to give you historical background or context. And then Santorini, I don't know if any of you ever been to any Greek islands, but if you can only go to one and you're in that part of the world, go to Santorini. It's so beautiful. Well, you'll see my own slides of that because there is a serious body of research of historians who think it was the basis, this island. You see, I drew a map of it. It's not perfect. It's a crescent-shaped volcanic ridge. The whole island is basically the top lip, if you want to call it that, of a volcano that blew its stack 3,300 years ago. We'll talk about that when we see the Mycenae slides, because some of the work is from that same culture, some of the Mycenae. But when you see my own slide, you'll see the actual place. It's breathtakingly beautiful. And so that is what I drew, this little map. And Thera is the name of the modern, well, modern, it's several hundred years old, but not an ancient town. It's a current only large town on that island. And then Akrotiri was the name of the old city that is found now. They have found ruins of Akrotiri underneath the surface of the water in that caldera, which would be this area here where the volcano blew its stack, and then it opened up a section. Otherwise, it wouldn't be water there. The Mediterranean Sea rushed in, the seawater rushed in after the explosion, I guess after probably several different explosions, had destroyed the town of Akrotiri. That was a Minoan town. So hopefully that gives you a little more clarity on what we're going to be talking about. Okay, again, you don't have to know those terms in terms, I mean, the spelling of those terms, but they're going to come up in the lecture. as part of the meaning. Okay, we got one more to admit here. All right, so I'm going to do screen share. Now let's see how this works, because we had a problem last time, but I think we're going to be okay with this. Let's see. Yeah, this should be it. Yes, there we go. Okay. The first must know, we're going to get this larger. Let me, I think I can get my image out of here. Yeah, there we go. And get this larger. Okay, you should all be able to see this. Yes. This is not the first must know, it's the one before it, but I want to make sure, because last night we had a problem, but I think we figured out what it was. It was that my laptop had been not charging overnight. I didn't know that was unplugged. And so it couldn't load. Can everybody, just any one of you say, can you see the image now? Anybody?
I can see your file window, but not a specific image.
Yeah, the image isn't opened.
That's part of what's worrying me, because this has never happened before until this week. We thought it was that it wouldn't load last night. So I'm going to try this again. Let's see. There isn't a lot I can temporarily. I want to go back. Oh, no, that just got it larger. Okay. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to try it again on this file, but it may be something about this file having sat here. I brought it up an hour and a half ago because I want to get prepared early to avoid this problem, which if anyone's here from last night, they remember this happening. I have no explanation for why, unless something's changed on the Zoom procedures, because it worked fine for 4 weeks. Okay, now can you see let's go to the first must know. It's called female figure. And
Still seeing the same thing.
Pardon? What? Sorry, please go ahead.
I'm still seeing the same thing where it's just the file with all of the images and not a specific one.
Boy, so something's changed then on Zoom since last week. It has to be. I can't figure any other explanation. I've charged this for like 24 hours, so it's not that. It's not that it's not loading. Okay, then I'm going to back out of this. This is what we had to do yesterday, and reload the file. For some reason, it is balking. And just a minute, let me exit full screen. It took about 2 minutes to do this, so hopefully you guys can be patient and we can get to this. Just go back to the original file source and hope it works, because it took until after the break to get this resolved, but I don't want that to be the case now. And people had to look at the small image. I apologize to them for that. One reason why I invited some of you maybe from last night's class to try and make up for any, I think we just had 2 slides in which that happened. Okay. I'm just trying to reload and see if there's something about why when it was sitting there for over an hour and a half, it might have had some kind of, there we go. This is the 5th week. Let's get rid of these other files behind it. And let's keep our fingers crossed that this time it works. Okay, if not, we're going to have to do a truncated version of the images, which I will just have to give you the notes and then see if I can figure it out. But can people see now this image?
You need a screen share again. We're seeing your webcam.
Oh yeah, right. Exactly. My bad. That one, of course. So we do it again. All right. Yeah, because that could be it. That's easy enough. I'd hit screen share, but I didn't do it before. Let's get this. All right. Let's hope it does it. Now it's
Yeah, that's good.
good. Thank you very much for your patience, all of you. Okay. Good. Thank you very much for your patience, all of you. Okay. Now I don't know why it's doing that, but at least the image is there. The only trouble is I don't want all that stuff on there. Let me move this out of the way. Okay, because then this is going to be a problem because, hang on, I'm not going to be able to advance it to the next slide. What? I've never seen this before, ever. What is this?
Window.
Oh boy. All right. Hang on. I got to try and drag it down. Nope, it won't drag down. Well, wait a minute. Maybe it'll advance. The arrows are there, but it doesn't. Okay. Print? I didn't hit print. Okay, we got it. My apologies. I don't know what is going on here because it did. Obviously, we haven't had this problem. Let's stop the screen share and go back. High tech is wonderful until it stops working. Okay. Now, let's give it another try and let's do. Okay, that should work. Don't tell me it's not working. Can people see that now?
You have to
Screen share one more time.
Okay, I understand. That's a step I forgot. Wow, I've never seen 5 images all at once. This is just bizarre. For me, it is. Some of you may have had this experience before, but I haven't. As you know, you've been watching for 4 weeks and this never happened. I don't know what's going on. So to hit screen share, I guess what I have to do, I'm trying to drag it. It won't drag. Okay. I guess I have to enter full screen again and try it this way. That should do it. Nope. What is this? Print. I didn't hit anything that said print. This is just driving me nuts. And you too.
Hit the little X on the top right-hand corner of this window. It'll close the printing.
Yeah, but I can't because it's covered by the top list of things. So I don't know what to do.
If you hit the cancel at the bottom, it should also work.
Yes, thank you. That was just what I was about to guess. Thank you. And now I'm thinking it should be visible, but it'd be smaller than full screen. I'll do it one more, the screen share thing one more time. So this is something I'm going to have to deal with okay. All right. I forget that. Let's try this. Now it says it's on screen share and the image is full in the way it always has been. Can anybody see it now? I hope. I apologize for the
files.
Oh, that's crazy. Then there's a disconnect. There's some kind of glitch. It's not anything I have ever encountered, including from when Michael Healy and I spent months going over how to deal with these problems. I've never seen this happen before. It resolved itself last night after the break, but maybe that was what it was. It was just overloaded or something. Okay, I'm going through the slides now because what I'm trying to do is figure out if there's any other kind of approach. I can't think of any other. So
I think you have to open the image before you screen share.
I thought that's what I was doing. I'm pretty sure I did the first 2 times, but I might not have the last time. Okay. Yeah, that's what I had done before, an hour and a half before. So now, in order to get to where I can do screen share, let us try it. Wow, one more time. This is bizarre. What's surprising to me is I'm seeing everything what is supposed to. It's according to my screen. It's projecting. It says it's on video and nothing is stopped. I am screen sharing. So one more time, if you can't see it, I'm going to have to do what I did last night, which is frustrating, which is go ahead and give you the notes while you look at just the smaller image. And then, of course, at some point, one of my students said, well, after the class or even during the break, she could look up some of the images. Of course you could on Google, but that's not what I wanted to do, obviously. I spent months getting these images into files that, as you know,
It,
work well.
it was quite a bit better when it was out of full screen mode, where it was kind of like half the screen rather than just tiny images.
Okay.
So
Oh,
maybe
but
just try it
so what do
full
you see
screen.
now? Thank you. I don't know who that is speaking, but what do you see at the moment? Because I see just the image, and it says you have screen sharing, and that means that I can't do anything more than I've done unless there's something uh, that no one's ever mentioned in all the training sessions I had for this. What do you see?
All we see is the file that has all of the images in it.
Yeah, that's something wrong with Zoom, something overload or something. This is the week that about 8 different school districts in the Bay Area joined, including several in San Francisco and Marin County, and they're using Zoom. And of course, that includes colleges and adult evening programs and all that. I'm guessing that's what it is because I can't think of another explanation. Last night we thought we figured it out. So you were suggesting, I'm sorry, the gentleman who was speaking, I'll give it a different approach. What were you going to suggest? Sorry.
When you had it out of full screen, it was much bigger images. Obviously not full size, but a lot closer.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, then let's try that. I think this is what we figured out, right? That one of these two, in other words, when you could see this, right? Now you're seeing all of the file, correct? That's
Yes.
better. Thank you for your patience. I really appreciate it. So you're saying it's at least a little better, or is there something in
Uh,
between? Something in between, which I'd never seen. It's either full screen or it's the full file. Did you say there was
uh,
something in between? Like,
there was something for a minute, but I'm not sure exactly what it was.
yeah, it's, oh, this is just, I don't think it's worth reloading that whole file again. I just did, as you saw while you all said. So here's all I can think of. Here's what we'll do. We'll take an early break. We'll do the first 2 slides, which don't have as much detail in them. I can tell you that. They're much less detailed in terms of the analysis. Okay, and then we'll take an early break, and I'll see if I can futz around with it with my wife and daughter in the other room. Last night, somehow, it got corrected during the break, the early break. So let's just do it that way then. Which means what? That you're only going to be able to see, I guess, the smaller images while I see the full image. So what you can do is just take the notes. Oh, sorry. I go back down here again. Let me try this middle one. Okay, so I'm going to skip this first one because it's not a must know. So if you're only able, I'm sorry, but that's for just the first 2. Let's see how it goes after the break. If we try to get this problem solved. Okay, so we're going to start with the first must know. You could just take the notes at least, and then you'll see a small version of that image, and then maybe during the break you could even check it on your phones or your laptops on Google, because these are famous images. They're definitely on many different kinds of websites about ancient art. Okay, female figure. This one, the first must know is female figure. and it's from Cyclades, Cyclades. That's a location. I'll explain what that is in a minute. 2500 BC or BCE. So this is a 2-foot tall piece of volcanic stone carved in the shape of one of two possible, one of two possible purposes, one of which could be that it was a priestess, an image of not a portrait of an individual, but a general or generic image of a priestess, a high priestess, an important high-ranking person in this ancient culture. And the other is that it's a goddess from that culture. What culture are we talking about? These are the oldest urban civilizations in the Greek islands, which, as I said, are in the Eastern Mediterranean off the coast of Greece, of mainland Greece, of course. Today, they're part of Greece. So this is a set of figures that you can go to the Louvre website. They're in the Louvre in Paris. That's where I took this slide. And they have hundreds of them. They were discovered, in the last couple centuries or so by archaeologists. And so what these are a mystery, because they're so old, this is all part of the meaning now, right? That they are prehistoric. By definition, there's no written records from that culture that far back. These were carved at the same time the Great Pyramids were being built. So that gives you some context. So obviously the Egyptians were way advanced beyond this part of the Mediterranean culturally. And so they had, though, obviously an important role for females in their society, in the Cycladic Islands is what they're called today, which are the islands closest to Turkey. Not all the Greek islands are part of that chain. It's a chain of islands that are, if you look at the map, they're the farthest eastern islands in the Mediterranean. And they had their own civilization, and all we know about it is that they worshiped certain multiple gods and goddesses, and that they had both male and female priests. And this is perhaps a priestess. That would make sense to me, or it could be a goddess. What we can tell is minimal detail that gives us the identity of this person as a female. Of course, the breasts, right? And then the overall shape of the body. However, we couldn't tell that if it was just from the neck up. We wouldn't know it's a man or a woman, because there's no features on the face. That's very deliberate. All these figures that have been found have merely, or barely, I could say, barely a hint of a nose. No mouth, no ears, no eyes, no other human facial features have been found on these pieces of stone. And they range from about a foot, some of them are even smaller than that, like 8 or 9 inches to a foot, to up to 2.5 feet. This one's about 2 feet tall. Okay, and it's carved out of the volcanic rock, because these are volcanic islands. We're going to talk about that after the break, one way or another. I think we'll be able to see hopefully after the break, the rest, the must-knows and my own slides of Santorini Island. Okay, so that's it. It's pretty straightforward. The meaning, that's all there is on it. Formal analysis is also pretty simple. This figure standing upright, and it is therefore stable. And the arms are even at a right angle, crossed over her chest. So that makes this almost entirely stable, except for the top of the head and the shoulders. It is balanced, 3-dimensional, complete image of a human adult figure. So it's balanced. And of course, it has rhythm, the 2 breasts, the 2 arms, the 2 legs. The texture is the real rough texture of volcanic stone. There is no simulated texture. It's just the real rough stone. And there's no modeling. It's the lighting from the museum that creates the shadows. But there is carved line, as you can see. Well, now you can't see from the smaller images, but between the legs, there's carved line, and of course the 2 arms. But there isn't really any carved line on the face. So carved line's not used here to create simulated texture. For space, it's a 3-dimensional object, about 2 feet high, and it only uses overlapping, and that's only on the arms. It's the only technique for space. And it's a cool gray color, the real color of the stone. Okay, this one is a little more complex, and then we'll take our break, an early break, because what we see here is a One of the slides that is important enough that I'm going to not cut it. I've told you each of these last 4 weeks, every time in each lecture, there is a slide, or, you know, usually there's going to be 2 or 3 at least each night out of all of the total slides that are so important to the meaning of that topic that I won't cut them from the study list. I'll give you a heads up so you can choose to mark them, you know, with a star or an X or asterisk or whatever, if you want to remind yourself to study them extra carefully for the midterm. But of course, the midterm is an open book test by necessity. All right, this is the second must know. Palace, it's 4 words. Palace complex at Canasos. That's Knossos. The location is Crete, the island of Crete, and the date is 1700 or 1700 BC or BCE. So with this, we need to talk about who were the Minoans, because this was the royal palace complex. Of course, means multiple buildings. There were dozens of buildings. It was a city within a city in the capital of the Minoan kingdom. I've mentioned this before. What's a kingdom? How is that different than an empire or a country? Well, a kingdom, of course, has a king, but it's not an empire. If you're just calling something a kingdom, that means that they just have a government, unified system of government, using unified language and religion for that population, the majority of people in that area, and one king, a ruler, you know, with usually some kind of army or navy. Well, these people is a little different. They were a kingdom, not an empire. What's an empire as opposed to a kingdom? Of course, an empire is a country or a kingdom that conquers some of the neighboring countries around it, or even far. You know, with colonial empires, they would sometimes be halfway around the world. They would conquer, of course, different cultures. So a kingdom and an empire are not identical. So this was a kingdom. Why do I say that? Who cares? What difference does it make? A big one. So here are the 3 facts. You definitely want to write these, and I will say them slowly and repeat them once. The 3 facts that mark the Minoans as unique as a culture in the ancient world. No other culture had this particular set of features about it, qualities, if you want to call them. Okay, the first one is that they did not have a standing army. I just said they didn't try to conquer other people. They didn't have an empire. They were just their own people under their own king and queen. And that is remarkable. They had a navy. They were an island culture. They occupied Crete, as you should know. Some of you, if you looked at the map in Stockstad, you notice it's the largest island in the Mediterranean, or at least the Aegean, I should say. I think Sicily is bigger, but it's the other side of the Mediterranean, off the coast of Italy, right? So this is the largest island, Crete, in the Greek islands today, we call it, but the Aegean Sea. And it was the main center of, or the most populated and powerful part of the Minoan kingdom. Okay, so this was where the king and queen, the joint rulers of the Minoan kingdom, resided and had their palace and the complex of other buildings. That leads to the second fact about the Minoans that you should have in your notes that mark them as unique in the ancient world. They were truly egalitarian when it came to the roles of men and women. Men and women shared equal power and importance in both their political and their religious life. That is totally unique in the ancient world. We just talked about the Egyptians last week, and the Egyptians had, of course, a very different attitude. Women were only once every 1,000 years. That's about what it was. 3 different women. We talked about this last time. In ancient Egypt, actually had real power, exercise power on the throne. And they were Hatshepsut, who ruled solely. Cleopatra, of course, ruled solely at the very end of ancient Egypt's history. And then there was Nefertiti, who was a co-ruler. But here, for the entire 600 years of the Minoan kingdoms or culture's history, women ruled side by side with men. Queens and kings were joint rulers with equal power, equal importance. That's very rare. And the third and final thing is they did not abuse animals in any way, shape, or form. Now, I know some people are going to say, well, were they vegetarian? And if they weren't, then you can't say that. Well, you've got to compare the context, of course, of what, 4 or 5,000 years ago. We saw this with the Babylonian and Near Eastern images of lion hunts. They did not abuse, torture, or harm animals in any of their religious ceremonies or for sport, period. They did fish. I mean, they couldn't grow much, rocky volcanic soils are not that good. In some places you can grow a few crops, but not enough to feed a whole kingdom. So they had to fish to survive. Okay, but they did not go on long hunts or sporting outings where they killed animals for sport or fun, nor did they abuse animals in any of their religious ceremonies. Now, after the break, Zoom willing, the gods of high tech willing, we'll see a larger set of images after the break of the 4 remaining must-knows, because we're going to take a break in about 3 or 4 minutes after this, an early break. And that would be to prove the point I just made about men and women having an equal importance in their society and having no abuse. That culture, the Minoans, never abused animals. In all their religious ceremonies, they used animals, oh yes, but never ever harmed them. And the proof is in their art. So let's start with what is this right here to prove that point. These are bull horns. They're supposed to be symbolic of one of the 3 sacred animals that they worshipped and had in their religious ceremonies, and in no way were they harmed in those ceremonies. And those sacred animals that the Minoans believe were above all other creatures in terms of their sacred importance to their religion were bulls, of course, snakes, and dolphins. And you'll see the proof of that after the break, hopefully. Well, you'll see it. Let's just hope the images are larger than what you're seeing now, I guess. Okay, so that's the first thing, is that there's a set of bull horns as a public sculpture in the main plaza in front of the entrance. Of course, that's obviously the entrance. It's a long hallway that goes way back. I've been all over this place. I went there in my travels to Greece, and it's well worth going off the beaten path because most tourists, American tourists, don't get there. If they go to Crete at all, they go to the beaches. Okay, fine. There's a lot more to see in Crete. There's good food and good wine. There's a lot of old historic towns, and then there's the most ancient site of all this, which is Canasos, as I just spelled for you, the name of the capital city of the Minoan kingdom. And this was where you would enter, where the, I don't know if you can even see it at all, the 2 columns are on either side of a hallway, an entryway to the royal palace complex. And the rest of this that's in the foreground of the slide, you can at least hopefully see that even at the smaller image. These are stairs. These are steps, I should say, steps leading up to the entrance to the royal plaza. Okay, so that's the whole meaning on this. Now, let's do a formal analysis again. If you're not able to see the large image, then you just can write this down and hopefully take a look at something on the web, either during the break or at the end of the class or tomorrow. Okay, so what do we have? We have cool gray color on the steps and on the bull horns sculpture, and on the 2 columns, they're painted white wood. And then we have warm colors on the walls and the roof of the palace complex itself, of the building, or the entry. It's really the entry hall that we're looking at. Now, for space, it is all you can see here is the opening to the hallway. So you just write it this way. It's a long, open hallway with a 15-foot high ceiling. So it's open at one end and of course enclosed on the sides. So it's a one long open hallway with a 15-foot high ceiling. That's all real space. Okay, and then we have the largest mass would be the stairs. And then it would be a close call. Probably, if you count the walls, you can only see one side of the walls here because the rest is in shadow. It would be the walls, and then perhaps the bull horns, and then the columns, the 2 columns. The rhythm is evident in the steps and the bull horns, right? The 2 horns on either side, and the 2 columns, although one of them is square, so it's not exactly the same shape, but they're the same height and width, same size, so they create some sense of rhythm. And even the walls have some brickwork, that's brickwork reinforcing them. So that would lead to the next element to describe on this site or this slide, which is texture. The texture is real. Real rough stone and brick on the walls, real smooth wood on the columns. These are wood, painted wood. Real rough stone on the stairs and on the bullhorns. There's not really simulated texture here. The modeling is the shadows from the sun underneath the overhang of the roof. And the largest mass would be this, well, I already covered that. Oh, balanced. Yeah, it is totally balanced. It's literally symmetrical. If you stand right here in front of the entrance where the bullhorns are, you'd see that it's symmetrical in size, and so is the plaza. So it is balanced left to right. And I would say top to bottom too, depending on where you draw the line. And of course, I mentioned the rhythm, the repeated shape. Oh, stable. It is mostly stable. A little bit dynamic on the bullhorns, and maybe the top of one column, but you probably can't see that in the smaller image you're looking at. So you could just say the bullhorns are a dynamic detail, but everything else is at right angles, straight lines, flat plazas and stairs, and flat walls and ceiling on the palace. And then there is line here, carved and painted on the columns. Is really the only line we can see here on the tops of the columns. Okay, I am going to now go out of screen share and try to futz with this during the break. So let's take about a 20-minute break. Let's see, according to my clock, it is about 10 minutes till, right? 10 minutes to 8. So why don't we come back at about 10 minutes after 8, and hopefully we can see these slides better. Okay. Oh, sorry, one more person. If you're just joining us, we're having a technical glitch and I'm going to try to resolve it. We're taking an early break now, okay? So I'm going to mute everyone so you don't have to hear the background noise from me or your other fellow students, okay? Okay, hopefully most of you, if not all of you, are back after the break. And between me and my daughter, I don't know if she did something that I'm not aware of, but we futzed around, and hopefully we got chats out from some of you that you can see the images now, I hope, the way they're supposed to be. This is the last one we were looking at. Whoops, didn't mean to go that far, that fast. Let's go back. I thought I'd leave it on the screen. This is the palace complex that we were talking about just before the break. So you already have the notes. I won't repeat those facts, but now you can see it better. And if you weren't here during the first portion before the break, several people joined, I guess, at the start of the break. You can see the recording of this as delayed as it was by that glitch. Nonetheless, the lecture notes you can get, of course, by watching the video on Friday. I always post my videos for each week's lecture by 7 p.m. Friday of that week under the week for that topic. So this will be week 5. Let me also go back now to the first must know from tonight, which is the female figure from Cyclades. Again, I gave you all the notes on this in the first portion before the break, but just so you can see it more clearly, hopefully, than we could before the break. So I have no way of knowing what the problem was, but if I didn't know better, I'd think it was something about these particular slides, because the same exact thing happened at the same point in my lecture last night. But okay, let's go on to now. I'm going to try and get this larger. Yeah. These are not must-knows, these next few. I just want you to be able to see the palace complex. Hopefully everybody can hear me, right? As I bought these slides when I was at Canasos, and I just think they're well worth sharing. So you don't have to take notes for the next 5 or 6 slides. Just watch and listen. And then when you get to the next must-know, I will, of course, tell you. I'll give you a heads up. Which won't be in too many minutes, but I want you to get a sense of the context of the site and the setting of this complex. Now, this is a different view of it, because you see, this is not stairs. These are walls made out of thick, heavy, rough, I think it's granite, rough stone. And then this was the walls of the complex where you had to get permission from guards who stood duty here, I assume, and you would enter through this opening if you were given permission to go see the royal family or do business in the royal compound. And then they would have speeches delivered, possibly the king and or queen or someone in the government from this balcony here. Okay, but these next few, come on now, don't give me, oh yeah, I've got to get it smaller, there we go. These next few are the interior. I just think it's one of the most beautiful sites of the ancient world that has been reconstructed partially from mostly original ruins or portions of the building. This was one of those sites that would have been buried under rubble, was buried under rubble for thousands of years after a series of volcanic eruptions. I don't think I said that before the break. So what that means is that there were multiple explosions. Well, of course, a volcano is an explosion, and then those are always followed or sometimes preceded by massive earthquakes and then tsunamis. So it was a series of natural disasters occurring in rapid succession within a few decades of each other in the Eastern Mediterranean. It was just one of those flukes of nature that things came to a head. Literally, the volcanoes in that area on those islands blew their stacks quite literally, and destroyed all of the cities that were on those islands, or if it didn't destroy all of them, the first explosions, then eventually, of course, a second series of earthquakes or tsunamis would finish off the inhabitants of those cities. So that's where the legend of Atlantis comes in. We're going to talk about it when we get to my own slides at the end. Okay, so this is a view of the entrance to the royal palace itself and the throne rooms of the king and queen. And look at these columns. They're very different than any columns that we've seen, vaguely similar to Egyptian columns from Karnak and some of the temples in Egypt. But these are wider at the top than the bottom, plus they have a unique color scheme. Most of the Minoan columns that have been found, portions of them and paintings of them, so we know what colors they were, these are reconstructed largely, but the wood parts would have disintegrated many centuries ago. But the stone, most of the stone you see is original. Anyway, these colors are really uniquely Minoan. They're deep, rich earth tones, rust red, some would call it, and black and gold. Okay, so let's get up close to, here's the throne room of the king. And you see the paintings on the walls are just fabulous. The vegetation that would grow along the coastline of Crete, which of course, as I say, was the main island of the Minoan kingdom. But look how small the throne is, the king's throne. And it's not a very fancy room. Wait till you see the queen's room. She had a much nicer room. Here's a closer view where the griffins on either side, that's what those are called, right? Mythical creatures are supposedly guarding the king while he sat on his throne. And of course, a griffin, this kind of creature was common to almost all of the ancient cultures in their religious and mythical beliefs in their imagery. They would show a creature with the head of a bird of prey, almost like a falcon, and the body of a lion. And of course, the size of a very large lion. And lions were meant throughout ancient cultures, not just in the Mediterranean or the Middle East, but in China and in Asia, all over Asia and Africa, and of course Europe. They were meant to symbolize guardianship, or the act of guarding the whatever it is, the building, the palace, the city gates, the throne room, wherever they were shown, whether it's a painting like this, a fresco, of course, on a wall, or sculpture. Lions were meant to symbolize that this was a guarded space from all potential harm. Here's a close-up of one of those griffins. Beautiful artwork. And it's the inspiration for the Art Deco, one of the inspirations for the Art Deco style. Some of you may know, if you know anything about interior decoration. A couple of you said you want to go into interior design in your mini bios. So at this point, if you don't already know this, you don't have to write this, but there were three main sources for the Art Deco as from the 20s, 30s, and 40s of design movement, which was not just interior design, it was architecture, fashion, jewelry, even clothing. It was inspired by Egyptian art, First, because it was following the discovery of King Tut's tomb is what started the Art Deco design movement in all over the world, not just in Europe and North America. So the Egyptians, the Babylonians, and the Minoans, this culture. So if that looks vaguely familiar, the style of the painting on the wall from, you know, earlier in the previous century, it's not a coincidence. It's consciously borrowing from that. Okay, now we're going to go to the Queen's throne room. And you see the dolphins, one of the three sacred creatures that they believed in. Now, dolphins were used in their religious ceremonies, but when I say they weren't harmed, this is what I mean. My daughter often mentions she, for years, thought that marine world should not be, you know, using, sea creatures, either mammals or large fish, against their will for forced entertainment. that was a form of animal abuse. Well, apparently there's some concession or some consensus, I mean, on that, because I think marine world's closed. In any case, not just because of the pandemic, they were having issues earlier. The animals weren't happy, let's put it that way. These animals weren't treated like that. They were just allowed to swim freely in large open pools, and those pools were connected to the sea by canals. So these fish were allowed to go, these fish, they're not, they're mammals, I know. These dolphins, I'm sorry, were allowed to go back to the sea where they came from after only maybe, you know, a few weeks, if that, maybe days of participating in a non-invasive religious ceremony where some of the priests or priestesses would swim in the water with them and conduct religious ceremonial acts, none of which harmed these animals. They weren't forced to perform tricks, for instance, or anything like that. Okay, but let's see the actual throne room. Much fancier than the king's throne room. Hope by now you can see the arrows, right, with the details. Her throne is more comfortable. It's like a very large hassock, right? And it probably was, you know, upholstered. And then here are the dolphins we just saw, you know, but at a distance. And geometric decorative patterns framing the openings on the walls. Frescoes, of course, all of those are frescoes. But my favorite feature of this room was how cool it was. It was 110, 112 degrees when I was there. And there's no shade. There are no trees on this hilltop where the ruins of Canasos are. So the rooms inside the palace could be extremely hot, the smaller, you know, enclosed ones. But look how open this is. The high ceilings, the openings in the walls, allowing a free flowing, of air. And of course, heat rises. So they had the openings all the way up to almost the ceiling. But the most ingenious thing is, look, you know that phrase, it's genius. I hate that. It's so overused. But here it was. They're louvered, just like some 1950s and 60s apartment building windows. I don't know if you've ever lived in a building like that, but it's not safe. I can tell you, I had someone break into my living room while I was sitting watching TV once in Berkeley with a 1950s vintage apartment building with this same color, style of glass, because, you know, they're separate panels of glass that can open separately. But this concept, maybe those apartments got their idea from this, is unique, because what does it do? It gets the air circulating, you know, as heat rises, and then it gets it moving out of the room and back out these wide open spaces. This room was a good 20 degrees cooler than the rooms in the rest of the palace. So it's the Queen's throne room. And then we have another view of it. And a little more detail of the dolphins. And a close-up. Look at the intelligence. You can see here that the artist was trying to convey that they, the Minoan culture, the people, the artists themselves, but of course the royal family that commissioned, obviously, these paintings, wanted to convey their respect and admiration for dolphins and their intelligence, and the fact that they believed they had souls, which seems obvious to many people today, but in the ancient world, people didn't think like that. Okay, now it's really important. I want to make sure, so if even one of you can just answer, can you guys see this slide now? This is the next must know.
Yes.
Yes, we see.
Good, thank you.
Yep.
You're reassuring me, because I have no idea what it is that happened during the break. It could be just it took a while to download the files. That was the guess that my daughter had. But in any case, I'll work out some way of avoiding that. I'm pretty sure between now and next week from future lectures. Okay, so here's the next must know. It's the third one on our syllabus for tonight. Snake goddess. Well, guess what? I was just checking my more recent edition. I have like 3 editions of Stockstead. And just like every other historical textbook or source or website, whatever, things change over time. So this is really interesting to me. She's changed the title of this in a more recent, depends on what edition you have. If you have a used edition, of course, you might have the same older ones that I was creating the syllabus from. It should be said to be a snake priestess or woman, or possibly a goddess. And that's now how Stockstead listed. But we have to keep things consistent to avoid driving all of you guys crazy when it comes time to write your answers on the midterm. If this is, by the way, I should have said this to start with, this slide is really, really important. I'm not going to cut it from the study list. Okay, so take extra careful notes. So snake goddess is the old title that some other texts plus Stockstead's earlier editions gave it, so that's why I use that. But nowadays, most historians agree that this is more likely a priestess. So that's part of the meaning now, the main part. Well, what is the evidence for that? Well, we have written records from this culture. We don't know their language, which is odd to me that we'd have some kind of visual record. Well, you know, like hieroglyphics, of course, that's not an alphabet, right? The Egyptians used for centuries before they developed written documents that they were using all through the last 1,000 years or more of their history, or 2,000. But in their earliest 1,000 years, the Egyptians just used pictograms, hieroglyphics, or writing with pictures, of course. I think most people know that. It's not going to be on the exam. It's not a definition that I put on that list. But just so you know the differences, we're talking about records that were kept, and therefore it's not prehistoric culture. The Minoans kept written records in the form of some kind of pictogram, as well as a language we haven't translated. So what do we know? We know from the sites where these figurines, that's what they are. They're about 1 to 2 feet. This one's about 18 inches from top to bottom. We'll talk about what's on the top of the woman's head there in a few minutes. So if it is a priestess, the evidence for that is very strong, that it's a female, right, a priestess, high priestess, conducting a religious ceremony, a snake worshiping ceremony. We know, I've already mentioned, and you should be writing this now if you didn't before. They worship 3 kinds of animals, one of which were snakes. So these are live, poisonous snakes, 1 in each hand. And she has, let's take a nice close look at her face here, a very entranced look. She's almost like, in a self-induced state of hypnotic or trance-like state of mind. In other words, somebody else is trying to join here. Okay, so to recap, if this is a priestess, a high priestess, conducting a special ceremony, the snake, right, sacred snake ceremony, for lack of a better term, that's what we would call it in modern English, then she's taking live snakes and she is doing some kind of religious chant or song or something like that, or prayers in front of a large audience, of course, of worshipers. And we know the people who conducted those ceremonies, male and female, priests and priestesses, wore the same type of outfit, man or woman, it didn't matter. It was the following features were common to all of the priests, and priestesses, male and female, in that culture. They wore a leather apron to protect themselves, I guess, perhaps when they picked the snakes up from the ground or a box that they must have taken them from. Before the ceremony, the snakes could have tried to bite them, in multiple places. So they had a leather corset and leather apron. Then just stylistically, there's no protective value. Sorry? Hello? Sorry. Yeah, if you just joined, there we go. I was just going to show. Yeah, and then we'd had the pleated skirts. That's common to Babylonian, Assyrian, and Minoan priest class, male and female. They wore the same attire. And then they would have had a hard leather headdress atop their head. And if they were females, their skin was painted white with pancake white makeup, because that was a sign of the high rank of the person, females anyway, and also it differentiated men from women. You're going to see the proof of that in the next slide. the next must know, that I've already said this once, I think, but if not, now you definitely want to write this because it applies to all the ancient cultures until the Romans. The Romans didn't do this, but everyone prior to that, from ancient Egypt on, depicted men and women in different skin tones. I did talk about it last week. Yeah, women, upper class at least, or high-ranking women, were shown with the white color makeup, partly as an artistic device to differentiate between the male and female figure in those group paintings of, of two or more people, if they were both male and female in those scenes. Then the females were almost always shown with a lighter skin tone. And second, because it was supposed to protect the skin, the person's skin against the harsh sun. So she's shown with this, you see that there. That may look like maybe it was the actual skin tone she would have really had, but it's just that the white paint has worn off where the arrow I'm showing you her. Okay, and then yes, her breasts are bare. And that's part of the outfit that they would have had for this ceremony. Not all female priests or priestesses did that. But let's look at something else. What is this on top of her head? Anybody want to hazard a guess? It's a living.
You know more about.
Sorry?
Is it a cat?
I think so. I think you got that right. It sure looks like a very nervous house cat to me. And cats were also sacred, but not quite as sacred as the snakes in this culture. Now, the Egyptians considered, you know this, many of you, right? They considered cats almost like minor gods on earth. And they even mummified the family cats when they died and gave them elaborate burial ceremonies. Yeah. At least in the upper households when they could afford to do that. So I don't know why there's probably, just say very likely, a cat perched atop her headdress. I can tell you, if you've never had a cat be nervous in the middle of like an earthquake or something, I've had that happen. You don't want them on top of your head. Now, she has something protecting her head because that happened to me once. I had a cat launch itself off the sofa and use my head as the second launching space when we had the biggest earthquake in my life. Loma Prieta, if you know what I'm talking about, 1989, killed 70 people in the Bay Area, collapsed part of the Bay Bridge. That earthquake, I was sitting at home with my cat watching the A's and the Giants get ready to play the first game of the World Series, which of course never happened. Well, it did later, right, because of the earthquake. And I had a cat sitting on the sofa right behind me where my head was at the same height as the cat. And when that earthquake hit, I was bleeding by the time the cat used the top of my head as a launching pad. So you don't want that to happen. So they planned this, obviously, because they knew it was safe. So that must have kept the audiences, I assume it's part of the ritual, attention focused on the priestess. Well, the snakes themselves might, you'd think, people would say, oh, how's she going to avoid getting bit? Somehow they did. Perhaps the snakes were slightly anesthetized. I'm guessing that the priests and priestesses, in fact, we don't have to guess, we know, they took a certain libation in order to get the courage to do these kind of risky ceremonies before they began the rituals. Okay, so let's back up and just do a formal analysis now. So that's the meaning on this. All right, it's balanced. Yeah, it's a human figure with, all the parts in normal positions. And of course, the snakes on either side. It depends on where you draw the line, but I would say it's also balanced, obviously left to right, but also top to bottom if you do the line about here. Okay, and then we have the rhythm of the arms and the pleated dress and the face and the two snakes. It's dynamic on the forearms and the hat and I guess the breast, but everything, well, it's a mixture. Yeah, you could say it's also dynamic on the apron. But she's standing upright, so it's at least, I would say, as much stable as it is dynamic, because the arms are out at a right angle from her shoulders here. So it's both. For size, it's a life size, sorry, whoops, I misspoke. It is a real, I didn't mean life size, three-dimensional object about 18 inches tall. I've seen this. It's in a museum in Crete, near where it was found. And so some of these are as small as 8 or 9 inches. Well, usually a foot. They're not much shorter than that. And some of them are 2 feet. So you can say this one is about 18 inches. And it's got overlapping. It's the only technique for space. The hat overlaps, or the hat, I meant, overlaps her head. And her attire, of course, overlaps her body. Her hands, of course, overlap the snakes. Then we have painted line everywhere on the skirt or dress, on the apron, on her jacket, and of course on her face. But there is carved line to create the eyes and the mouth, right? And some of the details on her dress and jacket. So both carved and painted line. Warm colors on alternating warm and cool on her dress. The apron would have been painted a leather color, so that'd have been warm. And her jacket is mostly warm, well, a mixture. But her skin tone is cool because of the artificial makeup she's wearing. And that's not original, like I said, where the arrow is, that's just worn out over the centuries. The cat looks mostly a brownish warm color. Of course, so do the snakes. Okay, texture, yes, good cement texture on her dress, her skin, her headdress, the snakes, and the cat. And there's no modeling. It's just the museum lighting. Okay, this is also a very important one that I won't cut from the study list. This next note.
What was the date on that last one?
Oh, sure, absolutely. I might or might not have given it to you. I apologize. I could have overlooked it. Crete, the location, but I'll spell that too. That's of course the same as the slide before. Crete. Again, that's the largest Greek island, Crete. But we just give the name of the island. And the date, 1600 or 1600 BC or BCE. I'm pretty sure I did that. I apologize. Thank you for reminding me for the sake of everyone in the class. So yeah, just always holler if I forget something like that. Okay, 1600 BC is a commonly given date. Some historians put it back or forward 100 years. So we just go with whatever Stockstead uses in her textbook. So the same is true for this. It could be 100 years earlier or later, but we'll go with the date that Stockstead used. Here's the title: Bull Jumping Fresco from Canasos. Now I've spelled Canasos, but I'll spell it again. Same place where the palace complex is. K-N-O-S-S-O-S. Location again is Crete, C-R-E-T-E, of course. And the date 1500, Stockstead's at least, the most recent edition I have had that date, 1500 BC or BCE. Here's proof of what I said earlier about them not abusing animals in their religious ceremony, A, and B, of the fact that men and women had equal importance or equal roles in their religious. And we saw the proof of that, of the political equality between men and women with the king and queen's throne rooms already. But here's proof of the religious, the equality they had in their religious life. So we have a charging bull here. This is not a bullfight. If anyone's risking harm, it's the humans. We have two priestesses. They're wearing white pancake makeup, and then we might be able to tell that because of their hairstyle, possibly, and somewhat their physiques, that these are females. But we wouldn't have to guess because the skin tone tells us. And then here's a male, a fellow priest, that is jumping, vaulting, quite literally, over the back of a charging bull. Don't try this at home. Yeah, I mean, this could easily result in the death of any of these humans. So the bull was never harmed. I mean, the most contact they had was to grab the horns like this woman's doing, and then she would wait till this guy was caught in the arms of the priestess at the back end of the bull, behind the bull, and then she'd do the same. It would be her turn to leap over, vault across the back, and then be caught by, well, probably him, because he'd be in line to do that. Over and over, they do this. Now, they did have arenas like a bull ring, but no physical harm, no weapons were used, no blood was shed. I had a chance to go to a I guess you could say, sorry, a bullfight. I sort of say blood fight. A bullfight in Spain, in Barcelona, which, by the way, has northern Spain has outlawed bullfighting. It's a separate section. They were talking about independently breaking away as a new country, and it hadn't happened at this point. It's the northern, most prosperous part of Spain. And they decided in their, whatever you want to call it, the political system, to regional government, to get rid of bullfighting, which is a big deal. Spain is the birthplace of bullfighting, but not here. This would only have been a harmless ceremony, a ritual in which the bull was the one who really could have harmed the humans, not the other way around. Okay, and then we don't know what these are. There are theories that these are just geometric patterns. Some textbooks have cited the possibility that they're like stones of different colors at the bottom of a clear stream where the water is rushing over them, and it's shallow and you can see the exact texture and color of the stones. Other people have said, oh, maybe there's some kind of celestial bodies in the sky, but I don't really buy that one. I think they're just geometric patterns, or possibly some kind of mollusks, bottom-dwelling creatures from lakes and bays. Who knows? I think they're just geometric patterns, but it's very rich and detailed. Every one of these frescoes, by the way, this is from the royal palace at Canasos. They found it in pieces, and you see the dark parts here, the darker sections. Those are the original pieces they found, shattered on the floor, lying underneath, thousands of years of rubble after the palace was, destroyed, and then reassembled in the museum where they are in Crete. And then they added these portions. So the lighter sections, for instance, where the bull's white, that's just blank plaster, but everything else is original to the actual piece itself, the original fresco from 3,500 years ago. It's fascinating. Okay, so you see the evidence here for the equality between men and women in their religious ceremonies. Okay, formal analysis, pretty easy. This is, there's some stability to this woman being, she's upright. Okay, her back, let's just say that. I guess both of them. But actually, this priestess here, I don't know, somehow when the slide got transferred from the original slide I had to this file, it slightly cut off here, but you could see her whole leg. So I guess she's somewhat stable, the backs of the two females, but everything else, it's 90% dynamic. The bull, completely dynamic. And the arms of the two female priests and the male priest, all of them are curved lines. The largest mass, that's really easy, the bull. But the second largest masses are the priestesses, the female priests. They're larger than the man. He's more like a jockey-sized person. That's how I see it. Anyway, he would have to be smaller for them to catch him, of course, partly, and also to be agile enough to get himself over the top of a bull without getting injured. And so we have a set of rhythms, of course, of the outstretched arms on either end, the bull's horn and hair, and the legs and heads, of course, the various body parts of all the figures. The bull's, of course, legs, powerful rhythm everywhere. There is some texture here, but it's mostly it's limited to the hair of the bull and the hair on the humans. Some people think they see some texture in the horn, so you could make that case, but otherwise it's mostly just color and outline. So line here is used as bold outline on the bull, right, and thin on the humans. There is no modeling, none. For space, the only technique is overlapping. And it is roughly balanced left to right, with the two females on either side, the bull in the middle and the male, the priest in the middle, leaping across the back. Okay, yeah, all right. We're gonna do two more must-knows and then I'll show you. We're gonna end significantly early tonight, by 9:30, I would say, sir. All right, you don't have to take notes on this next two slides, but just follow me because they're developing, or leading, I should say, leading to the context, setting the context for the last two must-knows as to where those sites were. I was at those sites. So let's start with the fact that this is Greece now. We're looking at mainland Greece. And I'll tell you when you need to start taking notes. Again, the next two slides, you don't need to take notes. Okay, these are the walls of Mycenae. Mycenae I'll spell for you, will be the first, next must-know slide. Mycenae was the most powerful of the early or archaic, that's the right word, archaic, as in the beginning of a culture, its most simple, early, some would say primitive period. Archaic art is usually less technically skilled or less advanced than the later art from that culture. That's always it's pretty much standard of human history. So this is the archaic period of Greek city-states. Athens was a tiny village at this time, if it even existed. This is about 1400 BC. And those walls are the original walls. They haven't had to be restored. In fact, I think you can tell they didn't finish restoring them because the top 3 feet, I think it is, there you can see a hint of it, would have been all the way across. And then you're looking at a couple of valleys, hills and valleys. These are vineyards. And there's the Aegean Sea. It's hardly visible in the, and that's not smoke. They weren't having fire. They do have bad wildfires in Greece, quite bad, almost as bad as we do, but not as often as we've been having. Anyway, you could see the Aegean Sea. That's not a small point because this city was not a coastal city. It's not a port town, but it's close enough that they could easily get to the sea. So they had a navy, they had a standing army. These people fought with their neighbors. The Mycenaeans were the wealthiest, most powerful of all the early, you could say either early or archaic Greek city states. And look at this view. It's rather impressive. These last 2 are my own slides. Looking up, that's 22 feet of unsecured stone, which is held together strictly from the weight and the cut of the stones as they were lined up with each other. And it's held in place for almost 3,500 years, at least. Well, let's see, 1,500. Yeah, that's right. About 3,500 years or 3.5 millenniums. These walls, they would have been about 3 feet higher. That's all that's missing. Okay, now let's go to the next must-know, and I will, of course, spell this for you. This is the Lioness Gate, Lioness with 2 S's, Gate at Mycenae. That's Mycenae. The location is Greece, because now we're on the mainland. We're not on the islands here. 1250 BC. Well, now that's the latest date anyone gives it. Most historians give it 1350 or 1300. Why? Because we know who built these city walls. The same king, this is all part of the meaning, who was, obviously was king of the city of Mycenae. Now, when I say city, some of you know this, but if not, you want to write this. We're not talking about just a town with walls and that's it. It's a small, like a mini kingdom. They were called city-states. There are some in the world today. Singapore, used to be Hong Kong was, now it's more and more being pressured to join mainland China, as you know, if you've been following the news. I have friends in Hong Kong. I fear for their future. But anyway, whatever, that was a city-state, back before it was, seceded to China. And Singapore is. So there are a lot of places in the world today that way. But in the ancient world, that was normal. If it wasn't part of an empire, and this wasn't an empire, then you had a small kingdom of, thousands and maybe hundreds of thousands of people in the countryside in small towns outside the main city who were ruled by that city. So that's called a city-state. So you just can just say Mycenae was the most powerful, the largest, wealthiest, and you could say strongest or most powerful of the early Greek city-states. This is way before Athens and Sparta. They were just small towns. Hundreds of miles away, by the way. So these are, or this was, the main gate to the capital of that, small kingdom, that city-state. And of course, inside these walls were the royal palace of the king. Who was the king who built these walls? The guy that launched the war against Troy. So that's part of the meaning of this slide. The Trojan War, and when I was growing up, everyone said war is plural. Wrong. It was a single 10-year-long war. And the Greeks won it in the end with the, you may recall, if you don't, the first night of class, I talked about this, with the Trojan horse, meaning a horse outside the city walls when they said, oh, we give up, we can't conquer you, Troy, we're leaving. And it was a trick, of course, a ruse. The soldiers were hidden inside the horse. That's all part of the history of this city, because the Greeks who fought that war came from this city and the other cities that allied with them. So the king of Mycenae, because he was so rich and powerful, was able to, let's just say, convinced all the other Greek city-states around him to join him. So they launched their navy and their soldiers on board their ships in a war to try and conquer Troy. Why? Because his sister-in-law, his brother's wife, Helen, you've heard of Helen of Troy? Again, wrong. She wasn't from Troy. She should be called Helen of Mycenae. She was from this city, or at least lived there at the time. She was abducted. Some think she went willingly with the prince of Troy. In any case, she disappeared overnight. So now you get a slightly better view. I think this is good to close up here. All right, so these were the main gate. This was the main gate. There were several. to the fortified city or city-state. Well, it was a city inside the walls. It was just the city of I said Troy. Sorry, of Mycenae. And here we see lions again, the images we've been seeing now several times throughout the last few weeks of lions depicting, you know, powerful creatures depicted, I should say, as powerful creatures guarding the entrance to something. Well, here, the whole city, the main gate, protecting the king and all the inhabitants. So these lions are lionesses, females. We now know that. It used to be called the Lion Gate, and that was also incorrect. Things often have a way of getting corrected if enough time passes, hopefully, in human history. Okay, so what is this? Look at the column. It should look familiar to at least a few of you who are, you know, following that first slide after the break of the entrance to the Royal Palace complex at Canasos. Exact same style column. So what does that tell you? They're copying the Minoans. So that's part of the meaning. In their architecture, they copied the Minoans in terms of their temples and the columns they used. Now, you can't say for everything. City walls like this, they go back thousands of years before either the Minoans or the Greeks. So you could just say for their architectural design, or the design of their larger public buildings, such as palaces and temples, they emulated or imitated the Minoans. That's a Minoan column. It gets wider at the top. It has a simple little ridge or capital. That's what that's called, the top of a column. It's a capital. It's exactly the same style as the ones we saw at Canasos. Another thing that should look familiar is the stonework around the entrance. And this is a lintel. Now that is a term that is likely to come up on the midterm. The monolith and lintel, the technique of architectural structure or design, or I should say construction. It's structural, it's functional, of course, around any opening, whether it's the stones at Stonehenge or here, the main gate to Mycenae. It's the same technique. It's thousands of years old. It's the oldest technique of architectural structure known to the human race for permanent structures, right? Made out of stone or brick. Well, you can't use brick. It has to be stone, yeah. Later on, of course, you could see these things emulated in metal, right, with skyscrapers, but that's thousands of years later. So just say the oldest method known to the ancient world of construction for any type of public building or site is the monolith and lintel. Here it is in much thicker lintels. That lintel here is massive. Okay, so that's most of the meaning, and we'll only add that this was covered. I don't know why Mycenae, I never read the exact reason, was finally lost, you know, became a lost city, you know, throughout history. Things happen, right, to cities, whether it's a natural disaster like the Minoans. I don't think that was the case here, or else the walls wouldn't have survived in this shape. So for whatever reason, it was abandoned and then covered over by sand and dirt, you know, thousands of years of earth, and lost to historians, and then rediscovered in the previous century, or it might even been the late 1800s, because that's when a lot of archaeology started, in the late 1800s. And that's when Troy was rediscovered too. Troy's a real place. People thought it was a myth for thousands of years, or hundreds anyway, hundreds of years in Western history. It was taught to be a myth, but it turns out there was such a place, and there was a war of the Greeks versus the Trojans. The Greek horse, the wooden horse, that we don't know for sure if that ever happened. Okay, so this was lost. It's the last fact you could write about the meaning. To historians, for thousands of years, it was buried by time, just say by time. Okay, formal analysis, balanced. Oh yeah, 2 lions on either side of one column, and the walls have the same, right, size stones roughly on either side. And this is, of course, 100% balanced. By the way, if you're curious, there was a wooden, probably thick wooden, possibly metal doorway here, which is now long gone, of course. Okay, and then we have the space. It's a real space. These are 22-foot high walls of stone with about a 15-foot high opening here. This is someone, this is not my own slide. I have no idea who that is. It's someone probably from SRJC, art history or history department, you know, touring Greece and donating the slide to the slide library. Okay, so we have real space here, but there is, well, I don't even see overlapping on the keystone. This is the keystone, it's called. It's shaped like a triangle, and it helps hold these stones in place. So on the keystone, I don't see any overlapping. So the only technique for space is the real space of the 22-foot high walls with a 15-foot high opening. This textures are simulated on the column, of course, and the lions' bodies. Everything else is the real rough texture of the stone. It's a cool gray color, that should be obvious. There's carved line to create some of the simulated texture on the keystone, on the lions and the column, and visual line between the stones, which is the only modeling here that you can see in this slide, is the shadows from the sun. There's no technique for modeling. It is, as I said, balanced. What about stable? I would call it mostly stable, because the monoliths and the lintel, clearly those are stable, as are each of these rows of stonework. But the lions' bodies are really the only dynamic thing, because even in the middle, the column and the base it's resting on, those are stable. It's mostly stable. The largest mass, I would say it's a lintel and then the keystone, but you might think the other way around. I would leave that to you. And then the two monoliths are larger than any individual stones. They're almost all the same size. So those would be the third or fourth largest masses. Color gray, let's see, modeling, carved lines, cement texture, I think that's it. Okay, this is the last must-know, and then we're going to see Atlantis, the site for what was very likely the source for the legend of Atlantis. But if it wasn't just a legend, then there are historians who believe there was such a place, but not a whole continent, just an island or a group of islands, which would make sense. And I'll explain why many historians believe that. I do too. And if that's the case, then the best candidate for the site that would have inspired the story or legend about Atlantis, advanced civilization that disappeared in a series of natural disasters, would be the island of Santorini. And I'll show you that and what it's beautiful at the end here. We'll still end early. Okay, this is the last must know for tonight. Beehive, one word, beehive, tomb, right? T-O-M-B, at Mycenae, M-Y-C-E-N-A-E. Again, the same spelling. Greece, same location. In fact, it's just outside the city walls of Mycenae, 1300 BC. Okay, what we know about this king, which is why I dispute the date for the Lioness Gate. There we have your rhyming for tonight. The date of the Lioness Gate, as was in my edition, at least, of Stockstead, I think it's 50 years too late, because the king who built those walls, or at least most of them, including that gate, is the guy that was buried here. Well, just do the math. 50 years earlier, he was dead. Now, maybe they kept building the walls for decades and decades after he died, so we don't know for sure. Anyway, this was one of the more tomb of one of the most powerful kings of ancient Mycenae. The first and famous one that, built the walls. You can just keep it simple, that we just saw, and therefore probably including ordered the building, of course, not physically with his own hands. The Lioness Gate. So what is this? Well, here's another slide I was able to gather. See, look at this. This is kind of neat. I've never seen this before this semester. That's what it looks like when you're standing in it looking up. I've been inside this, and it's pretty interesting, if not downright spooky, because you're looking at a 22-foot tall, conical shaped tomb, which reaches, almost, not a point, but nearly, a very narrow top. It gets narrower, of course, like cone wood, or the top half of a beehive. That's the other way to look at it. That's why it's called a beehive tomb. And this is the entrance. And that is not more than about 5.5 feet. I remember I had to duck to get in here. So people were shorter back then, but they brought the body of the king in his coffin, along with all his worldly belongings, at least portable belongings, including gold, jewelry, armor, all kind, I think a chariot, his throne, and they were buried with him here in this tomb and then sealed over. And the tomb is buried in the side of a mountain. You have to go through a tunnel to get here. It's now, of course, lit by electric lighting, but back then it was torches. So it was meant to be hidden from grave robbers. Now that should sound familiar, right? To another culture we discovered last week. They learned that, or let's say they were inspired to do this with their deceased kings, this kind of a tomb, and with the king's belongings by the ancient Egyptians, whom they traded with for thousands of years. The early Greeks, or say hundreds, it's more like hundreds here, because the Mycenae culture had its peak between about 1600 BC at about 1000 BC, and then it faded. It may have disappeared shortly after that. And then the slow rise of Athens and the other cities, we're going to talk about them next week, the more famous ones that are the latter period of ancient Greek history. They were just small towns back then. So in other words, if you're writing, this part of the meaning, you should say that this tomb, the use of it, not the shape of it, but the use of the tomb and the use of it as a depository or safe, place to keep all of the king's portable. Of course, they didn't put everything he owned in here, some of his furniture perhaps, but his portable belongings were buried with him. That idea they were imitating. They got the idea from the ancient Egyptians, whom they traded with for centuries. Okay, one other thing, and you don't have to write this. If you ever go here, it's outside the city walls, so you have to either have a guide or really know your way around. So I was with a woman who was a Greek born and bred, and she was married to my best friend, and she had knowledge of history like very few non-historians. So we were lucky, me and him, the three of us traveled together all over Greece and Egypt. So the slides you saw I showed last week of Egypt were from the same, three of us traveling together. So when we got into this tomb, this is just a little heads up, she said, "Oh no, bad timing." And we said, "Why? What risk is there, except that if you're claustrophobic, even then the place is 22 feet high and it was well lit." She said, "Here come the French teenagers." And it was a whole group of French teenagers bicycling through Greece with their history teachers. And when they got inside here, they all started yelling and screaming and shouting at the top of their lungs as loudly as they could. It was ear splitting. In other words, this is an echo chamber like few you could ever imagine being in. And if you're there when there are people yelling, screaming, especially a large group of them, you're probably going to want to either cover your ears or leave before that happens. Okay, formal analysis. It's actually a cool gray color because I'll go to this slide again. This is more what it actually looks like. The color, it's close to it. But this is, that's a black and white photo, of course. So the discoloration of the walls is from chemicals leaching through. So it is a cool grayish or almost bluish gray color, the original color of the stones. The patterns are, of course, repeated over and over. So there's lots of rhythm of the piles of stone. I mean, that's pretty much all the rhythm. And each stone is stable, but the shape of the tomb itself, of course, being curved, conical, is dynamic. It's balanced, totally symmetrical, left to right, but weighted or unbalanced toward the bottom, of course. And then we have the space. Well, it's one big open cone-shaped room with a 22-foot high ceiling. There's no techniques for space. There's no modeling. When this was completed, you couldn't see your hand before your face. There was no lighting inside here once they closed the entrance. So it wasn't meant to have any effect for modeling. There is line here, carved line, not painted, of course, on the edges of the stones. The largest mass, I don't, it's really all, each stone is almost exactly the same size. So it's really one, the whole thing together is a single mass. It's stable on each stone. Oh, I already said it, dynamic. Oh, the texture is the real rough texture of the stone, right? I already said it's balanced, rhythm. Oh, mass, yeah, there is no larger mass. All right, here's what I'm going to try and do. We did this yesterday. I'm going to try and get back to, let's see, in order to get out of this file, I have to remember how to do this, to get to the slides I have of my own slides of Santorini. I'll go ahead and tell you a little bit about it while we're working our way back, but of course they won't show here. Whoops, stop. Okay. Okay. Try to get this exit. Okay. I'm going to pull up that file while I tell you a little bit. Santorini is an island about halfway between Greece and Turkey, and it takes overnight to get there. It is not really practical to get there in, one day, and certainly not a day return like you can do with some islands in the Mediterranean. You can take a boat from Naples to Capri, for instance, okay, and you can come back in the same day. You can't do that. So what do? You take a ferry boat, if you want to call it that. It's what it is. It's, they're ferries between all the Greek islands, and you got to spend at least 24 hours between leaving Athens, getting on the ferry boat at the port there, and you'll stop at several islands along the way. So that's what we're going to now. Let's see if I can just get us back to where the rest of that file was. Let's see. I'm going to try, if I don't want to have to go all the way back to pull the file up from scratch, I'm going to try and get to, there we go. Yeah, let's see what happens. I do screen share. It might get me to the main file. No, it doesn't. Where we had it before the break, where I could see the sub file within this. So just bear with me here. It won't take that long, maybe 90 seconds. Okay, so what you can do is take this ferry and it'll get you there in about 24 hours, but you really should spend 3 days. Santorini is a small island. You can walk everywhere, or you can rent a moped, right? Or a donkey. Don't donkeys. People regretted those when they actually, I saw this, and I'll have visual evidence of that. Here we go. Okay, let's see. This should get us to, let's assume it's going to do the screen share. Okay. Hope you can see this. People see this, I hope.
Sorry, no, we can't see it.
Oh,
You're not
again.
seeing it.
Yeah, okay. Same problem we had before. And I don't know why. It worked fine with the slides from Egypt. So, because when you pull this up, hang on, I'm going to give it at least 2 or 3 tries, and then we'll see what happens here. Hang on, maybe it's that I have too many files on here. I don't know, like, it's just a guess. No, it disappeared. Okay, let's see what happens when I pull screen share. Maybe that's there. That might do it. Let's hope. Okay. Can you see it now?
It didn't open.
Why did it open? It's every other file I've done this with, as you know, from the last 2 weeks did. Okay, I'm going to stop share. Why didn't it open? We had this conversation, thank you, one of you, before the break, and we figured out, okay, well, maybe there was a procedural, process, step by step, something. I don't know. I've done it 4 times and this never happened. So what I'm trying to figure out is if you have to open it, hitting the file, I brought it up. It's open now. The file's open. So at least can you guys see the file here? What I'm talking about is the overall thumbnail file. Can you guys see that?
No, we're looking at your webcam.
Oh, geez. Okay, that has to be a glitch with the system. I'm going to have to try, and good luck getting tech services in. I'm going to try to. I'm going to call them first thing tomorrow. Stay on the phone until I get a live person, because this is not supposed to be happening. Okay, I'm going to try again one more time, because it's well worth it if, with your patience, we can give it one more try, because I'm going to try the other file. See, I inserted it into the file for this week, which should have avoided this problem entirely, but you could see I couldn't find it when I went back to the beginning of that file. It wasn't there, so that's why I went out of that file and tried to pull up the actual separate file of just the slides of Greece that I was starting to show you. So let's try it this way. Let's see. Greece and Turkey. Okay, I'm keeping my fingers crossed. First of all, I'm going to get rid of these superfluous files behind us here. Now, I don't see anything I'm not doing unless isn't it already open? Oh, a default program. Never had to do that before. That's what I usually just is what when you see it, it's open. Has been for the first 4 lectures. So let's see if that may or may not have made any difference. Okay. And then we have to hit screen share. So hang on, I'm going to do that. What is that? Store down. Where's screen share? There it is down below. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yay! You guys, I want to thank you. You're more than being nice about this. I apologize, but I'm going to make sure I'm going to do everything physically and humanly possible to avoid that problem in the future. Okay, so let's get this larger so you can all see it. All right, this is one of those islands, and I could just get my own image out of there, or at least way above. I mean, way off to the corner. So, okay, so when you see these islands from the boat, they're all tempting. This is Lesbos. You may have heard of it. And yes, it is the island from the name of which the word lesbian came. This is an ancient Greek term, the island and the word. Okay, so what you see here is a Greek church and a bunch of whitewashed houses, nothing unusual there. So let's go to the next island, the largest of these islands in the central Mediterranean, well, second largest after Crete, the Greek islands I'm talking about. Cyprus is actually divided. Some of you know this. There's been fighting there recently between Greece and Turkey, half and half. But all the rest of the islands in the Aegean are within 400 miles of Greece are under Greek control. And this one is. This is Paros, and it was almost enough, beautiful enough for me to want to get off. And I noticed, look, here are some churches. Well, you're going to see a couple there. That's a church, and that's a mosque. Why is there a mosque there? Yet, if you know your history, you might not have reason to know. Turkey ruled this entire part of the world. The Turkish Empire was huge, all of North Africa, obviously including Egypt, all of the Arabian Peninsula, all of Turkey, obviously, and all of southeastern Europe, all the way up to Budapest. Look at a map. That's a huge chunk. About a third of Europe was under Turkish control for hundreds of years, including Greece. So there are still mosques in some parts of Greece. And here's the town square with the town hall, Renaissance style. This is not that ancient. That's a Greek Orthodox church. This island is only about, the buildings in this town or city, including the city hall there in the middle, are maybe 500 years old. The churches could be slightly older. Now we are at the entrance of Santorini. This is what would have been the lip of a volcano. And when I drew that rather Mickey Mouse illustration of the island, the shape of it, you see this is the part that blew open when the volcanic eruption and or earthquakes were completed, allowing the Mediterranean seawater to rush in and create this harbor, this large caldera, which is now, of course, plugged. Otherwise, the water would keep going and turn to steam, of course, right, as it kept going further towards the core of the earth. So maybe that happened at some point. Anyway, it got plugged, and so the water stays where it is. Makes it a perfectly beautiful, sheltered, natural harbor. So that's why it's one of the most popular places in the world for Greeks to have summer homes, Greeks, Italians, other Europeans, and for tourists. This is when you arrive at night, as we did, me and my then girlfriend, now wife. We decided to arrive at night because we knew it would be 115. They told us this is August, okay, not the best month to go, but that's when we could travel during summer vacation, because I used to teach summer school in Oakland, public high schools. And then that left us like just the month of August to have time off. So it's hot and you don't get any shade. You'll see there are no trees on the island. So you want to get up early in the morning and go exploring. So we got there just to get a night, place to stay the night. And of course, well, we booked it for 3 nights. It was a person's home, and they turned over their, I think it was their son's bedroom. He was long gone, which they did for tourists, and we paid them whatever they told us, and they prepared a wonderful home-cooked breakfast all 3 days. So we arrived at night, and here's the only town of any size. There were smaller villages on that island, and that's Thera. I actually drew a little X and put the name of it. This is a modern town. By modern, I mean less than 1,000 years old. In Greece, that's not old. Here we are in the morning when we got up early to go walking out into the streets of, I call this the island of melting ice cream, because the buildings that are completely intact, this one isn't. It's been allowed to deteriorate, although it's still habitable. No plaster left. They didn't paint the white walls, or they haven't for decades probably. Otherwise, they'd look like this. But almost all the other buildings, you're going to notice, have this white plaster, covering over volcanic rock. That's what you're looking at on the other side of the street, on the exposed walls. All the buildings are made from the fact the whole island is a volcano. The island itself is literally the lip or ridge of a huge volcano that thousands of years ago blew its top. So let's take a walk around the island to the town of Thera. It's all walking distance. Well, actually, if you were to walk all the way from one end to the other, it'd be a bit much. It'd be about 20 miles each way, and you won't want to do that in the heat. But to get to Thera from, the outskirts, the whole town, you can cross the town in, 15 minutes. Okay, so we see there's, these wonderful narrow passageways, and then I love this kind of thing. This is folk art or street art. You see here, there's like a Greek temple. It's the entrance to a family compound, not rich people, but not poor, probably, solid or upper middle class maybe, judging by the fact they can afford to decorate the entrance to their home. And then here's the family crypt across the street. So when Uncle Thaxos passed away, you just walk across the street. Well, maybe you go to the church first for the memorial service. You see there right at the top of the stairs. So you've got your own neighborhood church for, family ceremonies, whether weddings, funerals, or anything else, christenings, what have you. They are Greek Orthodox, of course, in Greece. That means, Eastern Orthodox Christians. So then, generations of this same family buried their dead, of course, inside coffins in their family crypt, which is right across the street. Okay, so here we have what the effect I like to call the melting ice cream look. These buildings have this feeling. It keeps the town, some parts of it, because you see there are no trees, no vegetation, much cooler than it would be, obviously, if the colors were darker. So we're going to go see the edge of the volcano and why historians think that this is probably the origin of this island or inspiration for the legend of the lost continent of Atlantis. But most people stop saying continent because there's no evidence that there was anything that big that disappeared. A whole continent just disappeared from the face of the earth within recorded history. Oh, sure, that would happen millions of years ago. Of course, the continents were shifting, as you know from some of your knowledge of geology. But we're talking about within the last few thousand years, that big an event would have been recorded. So we don't think it was a continent that Atlantis occupied, but a group of islands. And if so, it's probably these very islands, and the largest of which, well, not the largest, the most logical choice for the actual site of Atlantis would have been this island. So let's see how it looks. Oh, there's the native kids just love following tourists around. You could rent these bicycles. Those made sense. I think I did that one day. But I'll show you donkeys later on as to why you don't want to waste your money on renting donkeys on this island. It's another multi-story, multi-tiered Greek Orthodox church tower or bell tower. And here's some more of that melting ice cream effect. I love these colors. These colors are the Greek flag. And if you know, they're blue and white. It's a particular shade of blue. These gates are over 100 years old. They're wrought iron. They probably came from the mainland or possibly even France. They look more like gates in France. And so this is somebody's residential compound. And then here's your walls of adorned volcanic rock. It's very good building material. And the back wall of this church is, but then all the rest of these structures and the front gate of this compound are all painted white over plaster. And then you have these neighborhood churches, or little, just say local churches, which are big enough for more than maybe 20 people, if that, just scattered across the island. And this one was actually outside the town of Thera. So actually this, I'm inserting this in the, not in the order I saw it, but anyway, you could see how beautiful they are. And this one is an example. If you've been to New Orleans, a few of you, I don't know if you have, you know about this. In places like New Orleans or these islands, all the Greek islands that I've been to, except Crete, it's big enough not to have this problem, have high water tables, which means you can't bury the dead underground or their bodies will just, pop up. That's what happened to Christina. I can't even speak. Hurricane Katrina, hundreds of bodies from cemeteries all over New Orleans ended up floating into, I don't know if you know this, into the Mississippi River. So one reason they couldn't get an exact count of how many died, now we think it was 1,800, worst hurricane loss of life in recorded American history. But they originally thought it was more like 2,500 because hundreds of bodies from some of them hundreds of years old, New Orleans over 300 years old, were not, the water came up so high that even burying them in above ground, like look at these, see where the arrows are. These are all above ground graves on a raised platform to keep the water from the sea beneath them, the water table, from pushing the bodies up, quite literally. But it's a beautiful church. You can see that the style of it is classically, almost looks like churches in Mexico, actually. But it's a Greek Orthodox church. All right, here we go. This is the next three views. I think we'll get across the point. It sure did for me. These little footpaths, by the way, fascinating little backyard gardens. I think it was over here where we ate one of the best meals. I still remember it. It was $5 a person, including a bottle of wine. And we added tip, of course, but homemade food is so good at these kinds of places. Well, all over the world you can find that, but especially the Greek islands. And their local wine is quite good too. I mean, it was probably brought from some other part of the island because I don't think they can grow wine here on this island. But on the mainland they can. And then there's these ugly modern hotels. They should never have allowed that concrete monstrosity, because every other building, the church and all these little houses, they're hundreds of years old. But look at these cliffs. This is the edge or lip of the volcano, and you see across the bay here or across the harbor how large it is, how wide. But let's go take another look. There's the town a little closer. Use the telephoto for that, but now look at that. That should surprise some of you. This quite literally, let me get my home image out of that, a little further up there. These are 15 there. That's the view I really want to focus on. 1,500 foot tall cliffs with about a 20-mile stretch across this bay. And then that is not a little pleasure craft. That's one of the ferry boats with about 50 people on board. See how it's dwarfed by the shoreline. I mean, this is the caldera, literally, of a huge volcano that, of course, about 3,300 years ago, about 1300 BC or BCE, destroyed the Minoan. Part of what destroyed the Minoan civilization was that kind of earthquake or volcano eruption followed by earthquakes and tsunamis. Here's a funicular, how you get from the boat docks, whether you arrive at night or day, to get to the town if you want to get there, other than take a bus all the way around the island. So that's the fastest way. Here's another view of that. Those cliffs. And now we'll end up with just a few more views, about a dozen more slides of another part of the island. But first we'll go past this church. Now this church was clinging to the side of the cliff and clearly had been closed, had not been open. Whoops, I hope I'm not losing my connection here. For centuries, well, decades, I shouldn't say centuries. It had been closed since like the mid 1900s, which now is, oh, what, gosh, I don't know, 60, 70 years ago. But when I was there in the 80s, it had been closed for at least 2 generations. So I asked one of the locals who spoke English, what's going on with this building? What, you know, I could tell it was a church, obviously there's a cross. He said, oh, that was a very famous Baroque church from like 1620 or so. It's 400 years old, almost even then. But it was damaged in earthquakes because they have a lot of earthquakes, not huge ones like the one 1,300 years ago, but big enough to make buildings, you know, literally unsafe. And so they became uninhabitable and it got abandoned. You can see by the broken glass in the windows. And then this is a well-to-do foreign tourist, an Italian who came there to spend the summers every year and just decided eventually he had enough money in his family to build this, with a rather authentic looking set of features like the white ice cream colored walls, or vanilla colored walls, and the volcanic tiles he used on his patio, and you know, the various simple lines that you see in that island. I liked it. For a modern villa, it's quite nice. And then here we go. The last part of this presentation is something I learned not to do, among many other things you may have heard me mention in the past. Going in August, well, I couldn't help that. And some of you may have no choice about what month you travel to hot climates, okay? But when you do, everyone knows this. This is not the point I was trying to make. You know, if you're going to go on a hike out in the open where there's no shade, multi-mile hike, and it's 110 to 115, you're going to have a nice wide brim hat, plenty of sunscreen, and plenty of water. We, and my girlfriend and I, thought that we had covered all those bases. When we got about 2/3 of the way to a black sand beach, and the goal for me was not the beach. I wasn't going to go swimming in that, you know, hot weather with no protection. I burned like a beet. So that wasn't the point of the trip. It was to see this 1,000-year-old monastery on a hill above the beach, and there it is. But I almost didn't make it back because my girlfriend gave up about halfway there. She said, forget this. It's too hot. We shouldn't be doing this. So we're going to miss our bus to the boat dock and we won't get the ferry that we've already reserved our return trip on. And so I'm going back to the, you know, room we rented, and I'll meet you there. If you don't make it on time, I'm going on my own. So I said, okay, fine. So I got to the monastery and then I turned around to head back. There's the beach, by the way. There's nothing to look at, really. Black sand, but no people. They were too smart, the locals. So I almost suffered from, some of you know, the serious consequences of heat stroke, because while I was wandering around, I ran out of water and sunscreen, and my hat wasn't protecting me enough. This is a NATO military base and a Greek Air Force base, and look how badly maintained the buildings are. It's our front line. It was a front line of defense against the Russians, against the Soviet Union. This is during the 80s now, right? Reagan was, the Cold War was still very much on. Some would say it is again with Putin, but in any case, we have, of course, at that time, a treaty with all the other European countries that weren't under Russian control, and it's called NATO, still around. And this was one of their bases. Inside these barbed wire fences, you're not supposed to get inside. There was nobody guarding the front gate. It was the most bizarre experience. The front gate was wide open. There was a guardhouse, a wooden guardhouse, and no one in it. I probably was foolish. I was looking for water, but there was no one around to ask. So I just wandered around, took pictures, thinking maybe I'll survive if I am lucky enough to finally run into someone with water. So I was starting to get delirious, in other words. But it was beautiful, quite beautiful. And this church is my favorite. Look at this bell that looks like something directly out of the mountains of Mexico, which I've traveled all over Mexico. So one of my other favorite places to visit. 500-year-old churches, they do have them in Mexico. And much older, of course, right? Pre-European pyramids, of course. I've seen those too. But just look at the bell tower. This is probably about 500 years old. And then the crooked cross in the distance. Things, even the church on the base for the soldiers wasn't, or airmen wasn't maintained. Okay, so we have like 3 or 4 more slides. This is a crop circle. I almost ended up not getting away from it. I almost ended up dying on this crop circle, or I thought I was. The heat was getting so bad, I was quite literally hallucinating, just mildly. And I was really worried because I didn't see any sign of human activity or shelter or water. And just as I was on my, literally kneeling down, saying some kind of a prayer, along came a car with a British couple. I think it was a BMW, and they waved, they rolled their window down, they saw me and said, would you like a ride? And I was lucky. They had water, they had air conditioning, so obviously I was lucky. That's actually, it should have been shown the night view when we arrived. Okay, we're going to wrap it up with just a couple more slides of the volcanic. As we were getting ready to leave and head to the boat, there's about 5 more slides. We noticed the difference in some buildings. Look at this one. Half of it's maintained, although it's been a while since this has been painted too, this kind of a raspberry color. But the building's still inhabited. It's not abandoned. And then all of the unmaintained or restored sections of volcanic rock there. And here are the donkeys I was telling you about. Don't rent donkeys. They take off with your belongings. You put them on the back as they tell you to do. So, oh, it's perfect. It's cheap, much less than renting a moped. You leave a couple $100 and in traveler's checks or whatever, or cash, and your passport. And if you come back and you don't have the donkey, you end up forfeiting the $200, so they'll give you your passport back. I had talked to several tourists that said they regretted renting these donkeys to use as their pack animals. They're not obedient, at least not the ones on this island. They'll run away with your belongings and you'll never see them again, practically at the drop of a hat. So I just saw these donkeys wandering by themselves that were escapees from those rental services. Okay, last 2 slides. Here's a view of where Akrotiri was, the original ancient Minoan city that was destroyed during the earthquake and volcanic eruption and has been found again. So now we don't have to guess. That's why historians believe that might have been the source. It was a wealthy city of about 25, 30, some say 40,000. That was a big town in the ancient world. And they found the ruins of temples, walls, whole buildings. They've actually restored some of the buildings in a shed. They've reassembled parts of them and added sections. So you can walk through streets in this shed. So on the way to, we calculated the time. So we had like a 2-hour window so we could get off the bus because it's a famous tourist spot and go inside this giant metal shed, talk about hot, but at least there was shade, you know, overhead, and walk around these reconstructed streets of Akrotiri and get a sense of what it would have been like 3,300 years ago to live on that island. And then here we go, the last slide, heading home on the ferry back to mainland Greece. And then there's another one arriving. You can see it's a real popular tourist spot. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. I am now going to stop the screen share and see if there are any questions anybody has about your papers or anything else that I haven't already answered. Because just about when I said we'd end, right? 9:29. So I hope you enjoy those slides, and I will work through the process in the next several days so that I think I can do whatever it takes to avoid there being such delays in the future. Because I was able to do that last week with the slides of ancient Egypt, so I should be able to with the slides of Rome. Next week, we were going to see my slides at the end, like we did today, of mainland Greece, meaning Athens and Delphi, and other ancient Greek sites on the mainland. And then next week after that, 2 weeks from tonight, when your papers are due, we're going to see my slides of ancient Rome. Okay, any questions from anybody about anything we just covered, or extra credit, or your papers? You should all have picked a topic. I'm going to tell you right now, if you haven't picked a topic, you want to get busy and pick something and start doing the research, and you can then email me with any questions or segment of the paper at any time. Now, Saturdays is daddy-daughter day in my house, so I don't check my email on Saturdays, but every other day of the week I do. So I would get back to you within 24 to 48 hours, depending on what day you send your questions or your emails. Remember, the best address is Mark, M-A-R-K-W, at AOL. Now most of you have been doing that because it's much easier and less cumbersome, at least for me, to read your emails and respond. Plus, it's easier to put an attachment on those because for some reason, half the time when I try to respond to people who email me on Outlook, that is the campus faculty website, it's not, oh, sorry, JC didn't create it. It's awfully cumbersome. In fact, my wife used to have it and she just totally got rid of it because she said it didn't work well for just personal communications. Even it's much more, it's slower, believe it or not, than AOL, and more cumbersome. But if you do send me questions on the campus email, and that's mwilson@santarosa.edu, those are both addresses are on the top of both the syllabus and the course grading policy handouts I've already sent you. I will respond to that too, questions. But if you want handouts or anything sent to you as an attachment, please do that through the AOL address.
And you said that we can find the recordings on.
Yes, by 7 p.m. I've been able to keep that commitment because that's a fairly straightforward process where I double check that it is the same video I wanted to send out. So this will be under week 5. Okay, if you missed any portion of it or any of the previous ones, just look on the syllabus for which week it is, because that way I don't put the date. Why? Because some people get confused. Oh, I didn't take that day. I was in the Tuesday class. They're the same lectures with the same slides, just different questions at the beginning and end. So I take the one that was the most, supposedly, whatever, efficient, I guess, or succinct. It had the least glitches, hopefully. Anyway, the point is I take the best of the recording of that week, just one of them, and label it week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this one, if you missed any of it, you'll see it by 7 p.m. on Friday on YouTube. You know what it's under? Mark Wilson's SRJC Art History Lectures, and then look for our 2.1, which week you want. So after 7 p.m. Friday, you can see this, or you should already be, well, you can already see the slides of Egypt from week 4. Okay, any other questions? Anybody has now? Because you can always email me in the interim between now and next week. Next week we go to Athens and Delphi, and we get to see some of the ancient Greek gods and legends from like the Trojan Wars and Achilles and things like that some of you are familiar with slides of mainland Greece. Okay, see you all next week. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank
You
you.
guys take care. Thank you for your patience again. Okay,
Thank you.
you take